Hi, everyone.
So it looks like we have some people that are not from KLab. So hopefully this will be a fun exposure to who we are, what we do, and what we're all about.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm Melanie, and I am a researcher at the Behavior Science and Technology Lab, also known as the KLab.
Al, did you want to give them your big news?
I just got accepted to the Master's Applied Behavior Analysis program at California State University, Northridge.
I know, which is actually a quite an impressive feat. So we're all very proud of her in KLab. Snaps for Mel. Uh, Super cool. She's gonna really be a true crown jewel at this program. My name is Matthew. I am finishing up. I'm a month away from getting my master's at the California State University Northridge Masters of Science and Applied Behavior Analysis program. Lots of words, but I'm almost done the education portion. So I'm moving into the practice portion, which is super exciting. And one of the big questions that we have when it comes to practice is, how do people select evidence-based practice?
Which we're going to talk about today. Our research presentation is about how parents make decisions with regards to adoption of evidence-based treatments. We also had our mentor, Dr. Ali Kazemi, help us with this research, and early on in the process, Normandy Anderson and Mung Jia also helped us with our literature review. So, the purpose of our literature review was to extend the literature on parents' treatment decisions for their children with autism spectrum disorder. And the way we did that was go to the search engine Google Scholar and find articles that cited the two most recent literature reviews on the factors influencing parents' decisions for autism treatment. So those two articles were Carlin et al. In 2013 and, of course, Wilson et al. In 2018. From there, we found 46 articles, and we wanted to include articles that had data from parents of children with autism spectrum disorder. Also, we wanted to include articles where the researchers looked at decision-making factors that influenced parents' decisions. And we wanted to also make sure that these articles were peer-reviewed, all experimental in nature, that there were no repeats, and that they were all in English. So we actually got a total of 7 articles from this review.
That was the process just from the very beginning. So then we were like, okay, cool, we got these articles. And super fun fact, we had some articles that were from the States, we had some articles that were from New Zealand, and we had some articles that were from Australia. So the data that we have, we found some pretty interesting similarities, even though there was obviously a difference in geography and culture. So pretty stoked to share some of those with you guys. So let's dive a little bit into the kind of data that we were looking at.
Right.
Perfect. Look at that zoom. Is that crisp, clear resolution? So we have qualitative data and quantitative data, if you guys look at the blue.
So basically what that meant, qualitative data were mostly in the form of interviews, sometimes surveys, but they were open-ended questions.
Right. And so basically that would take the form of researchers sitting down with the parent for an interview, just asking questions in terms of, why was this something that you selected, or what do you like about this? And the parent would just speak freely, as I'm doing right now. It'd be recorded, and then later at a point in time, it would be the recording would be coded and written down, and then the data was extracted from what the parent said. Honestly, just like the quick and dirty of it is, it was an open-ended question and they answered it, and then we pulled what they said.
Exactly. Thank you, Matthew. And other 43% were quantitative. So those were also in the form of survey questions, but these were closed-ended questions. So the parents would fill out multiple choice questions, for example, or fill out some Likert scale.
Which, if you guys don't know what a Likert scale is, it's just that simple, like 1 to 5, how much do you agree with this? You circle it. There was no space for them to put in their own words. Everything was kind of constructed, and they just selected from that, right? So we had some articles where it was free to say whatever you want to, and then some articles that was like, these are the particular things we're interested in looking at, please circle the above. And then we had some that were mixed. Mm-hmm. So the remaining percentage is within that little purple sector, if you can see that. And so there were some articles that used both kinds of data. So what did we find?
Right. We wanted to look at factors influencing parents' treatment selection. So in figure 2, on the x-axis, we have these factors that were reported to influence parents' treatment selection. And on the y-axis, we have number of articles that we found. So the first variable of interest was parent beliefs. So 6 out of 7 articles cited that parent beliefs were an influential factor in parents' treatment selection. Parent beliefs could be faith or what the parents thought caused their child's autism.
Okay, awesome. Mel, if you wouldn't mind just going ahead and
Ta-da!
we learned how to do this wizardry very recently, so I'm pretty excited about this. Yeah. Okay, great. So if the next bar is that purple color. I personally think the one next to it is a bit of a peachy orange. If anyone knows the actual name of that color, please put it in the comments because this is a subject of a very sore debate. The purple bar, we see that 4 of the articles mention that the particular therapy considering the client's needs was an influential factor. And this kind of means that individuals are looking at whether or not it was like a pill that was supposed to fix everything, or if it was looking at the exact individual issue that your child was experiencing, and whether or not that treatment tackled that exact issue, whether it was personalizable to the client. And there were only 4 studies out of 7, which is over 50%, that cited that as an influential factor in decision making for the treatment type.
Correct, yes. So if the child, for example, had a language delay, parents might consider adopting speech language pathology, for example. Availability of treatment was mentioned in 3 out of 7 articles. And so here parents were saying that if the service provider was in their area, that was a very important influential factor. We had some parents saying in the literature that they lived in rural areas and they weren't able to access certain treatments. So that was a very important factor for them.
Appropriately, the green bar stands for cost. So the one that looks like a dollar bill, that's actually what it stands for. Our research showed that about 3 articles cited costs. So some of these particular treatments can be expensive, and whether or not these were an affordable option influenced parents to select the particular treatment that they ended up going with their child with autism spectrum disorder. Another thing to consider as well is that a lot of the parents didn't only select one treatment throughout the entirety of their child's prognosis and diagnosis. If these are just factors that have influenced them selecting any sort of treatment throughout their entire history with their child and treating this particular symptoms of autism.
Right. And so Matthew was saying that these studies were from New Zealand, Australia, the US. So we saw across countries there were different sorts of funding sources available for parents. So if there were not any public sources of funding for treatments, that was also an influential factor. We also had 3 out of 7 articles say recommendations were a factor. So parents would go to sources of recommendations. We're going to dive a little bit more into who these recommenders were later in figure 3, but basically 3 out of 7 articles cited that recommendations were an influential factor for parents selecting treatment.
You know, it's important that we have these sort of conversations because that's what we want with our research. The next variable that we're going to be looking at is time. So 2 of the 7 articles cited that time was an influence in terms of parents selecting a particular treatment. There are some treatments that are more time intensive than others, and parents knowing upfront the time commitment and being able to commit a certain amount of time for the therapy that was prescribed was an influential factor cited in 2 of the 7.
That's so true. And also parents were talking about when they were being put on wait lists for a particular treatment and faced with the urgency of getting their child treatment. This was definitely an influential factor in adopting that treatment. Treatment side effects is the dark purple over here. And here, these parents were concerned about potential side effects that therapy or certain treatments could have on their child. For example, some parents did not want to administer drugs or medications or things like chelation just because they were fearful of potential side effects.
Correct. And some of those are absolutely founded in the data, which is going to be what we talk about after this, is exactly what constituted an evidence-based treatment, right? The last little bit that I want to say mauve,
Okay, that's
maybe
very specific.
rose, maybe rose pink.
Yeah.
That bar stands for other. So these were particular variables that would influence the parents selecting evidence-based research, some of that being from like internet sources or research that they had in their past or past experiences or like recommendations from other parents and things like that. So those were particularly cited in 3 articles specifically. Oh, I'm sorry, I said 3. I meant 2. That mauve's got me messed up.
It kind of blends in with the background. Thank you, Matthew.
So before we dive into figure 3, we want to touch on exactly what evidence-based treatment is, right?
Right.
And how we decided to define and go forward with whether or not specific treatments were coded as evidence-based or otherwise.
Right. So evidence-based treatments. How did we decide? So we did use 2 different criteria. We took a definition from a researcher named Slocum in 2014, where basically he says that we want to combine the best available research, clinical expertise, and parent and client values and context when we're thinking about evidence-based treatments as a whole.
Right, and so this is, Slocum was particularly looking at the application of the treatment. So the actual title of the article, if you're interested, is published in 2014, Slocum Evidence-Based Practice. You'll be able to find it and read all the wonderful reasons why he selected those 3 particular criteria. So we kept this in mind because research needs to be actually able to be applied, right? With this in mind, we looked at the National Standards Project, which is published the first round in 2015. The second round was in 2018, and there is a new one coming out, I believe, next year. It's a triannual. So they're constantly pushing out research. They have a board of researchers. It's centered actually in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
If we have any people from there, comment below. I'm actually an original East Coaster. But so I've been there. I've never been inside the building, unfortunately. National Standards Project, though, has individuals that are all experts in autism in some capacity, individuals with PsyDs, individuals with PhDs, and individuals with master level education. They filtered down all sorts of articles and research articles that were out there to meet specific criteria. And then once a certain number of articles met a specific criteria, with important things such as different funding sources, different labs. Like, it doesn't mean a whole lot if the same lab, same funding source is pushing out being like, look, this works, right? After reaching those particular criteria, the National Standards Project was like, we have 3 separate sections, things that are evidence-based, things that are emerging, and things that are not evidence-based. So what did we do? We looked at that list and we coded things that were evidence-based as evidence-based, and then had to filter out through some of those utilizing Slocum's criteria, some particular treatments that, for the sake of binary coding, would go better within non-evidence-based treatments, simply because the evidence required for the stringent criteria was not met at this point. I know that's a lot of words, so if you guys have any questions about any of that, please feel free to put it in the chat box. I will be active, because I think it's really important that we communicate to you guys why we coded things the way we did and what that in particular means. So we want this to be a dialogue, so please feel free to jump in there.
Beautiful, Matthew. And if you could also provide Slocum et al. 2014 in the chat, and also National Standards Project 2018, just so parents and researchers alike can go ahead and look at these sources if they want to later to see what are considered evidence-based treatments. Awesome. So figure 3, we're gonna jump into who were these recommenders. Okay. So 3 out of 7 articles touched on the variable recommendations, those being a factor in influencing parents' treatment decisions. And in all of those articles, physicians, the internet, and non-physician professionals like psychologists or speech-language pathologists were the recommenders reported by the parents. So it was really interesting to see what the parents had to say about these recommendations, because it looked like a lot of parents were getting mixed messages from very trusted sources like physicians. So physicians were reported to talk about evidence-based treatments when it came to autism treatment, but they also were reported to have brought up non-evidence-based treatments, and there were a minority of parents that even reported that some of their physicians told them that there was no such treatment at all for autism spectrum disorders. So you can see this is a lot of mixed messaging and can become very overwhelming and confusing. Another source of recommendation that parents thought was very overwhelming was the internet. So when they were looking for sources, treatments for autism spectrum disorder, there was so much information out there, and parents had to really sift through and try to figure out what would help their child. Another were non-physician professionals. So these were the recommenders.
So for those who don't know, behavior therapists, or BCBAs, which is the behavior analysts, which is the particular certification that we will be going for once we graduate, work with individuals with autism but do not diagnose. So the diagnostics come from the pediatrician, and it's fascinating to note that the individual who is diagnosing, where the parents are turning and specifically, this was reported in one of the articles, that the parents were turning and specifically looking towards them as the expert, wasn't able to point them in any particular direction. So what we wanted to talk about at some point is we want to have that conversation about the impact of that. Also, internet research is pretty loosely defined because, as you guys may well know, if you are a researcher, and you probably know even better if you're not a researcher, it's pretty hard to find research titles. Right now, I'm actually looking for the articles to post. I know I have them, and I'll put them on. But right now, it's taking me more than a couple minutes to find these evidence-based articles. And so that in and of itself can impact the kind of information that a parent is going to be seeking out, right? They have to be able to access it to actually look at it.
Right, when they're relying on these recommendations, and they want to make sure that they're getting the best treatment possible for their child. Another variable that was also mentioned in these articles, 2 out of 3 articles said that other parents with children with autism spectrum disorder were some of the recommenders parents were going to. 2 out of 3 articles were parents were going to books. And the other section talks about health food stores, also autism organizations, different ways parents were getting this information.
We wanted to look at some of these particular factors and kind of look at what it would be like to be a parent or somebody that's trying to navigate all of this information, right? We want you guys to think, though, about like how many of these different therapies are out there, right? And how many of these particular therapies provide some sort of like answer to a parent, because ultimately that's what they're looking for. And how we can, as providers of evidence-based treatment, kind of be applying what we have in a way that's going to actually reach people. One of the particular things that we were talking about potentially doing, and what you guys can do right now, are talking to your physicians and seeing, hey, if you have someone that has autism, what kind of recommendations do you make? Now, hopefully, they don't give you a direct example, because that would be a HIPAA violation. So I have more faith in your physicians than that. But I think it would be interesting for us to see what their level of knowledge of the treatment options that are available are, right?
Yeah, and we're super passionate about making this information accessible as well as consumable for parents who are going through having to make choices for treatment selection. And it's really a journey. It's not one doctor's visit.
I mean, I want you to like raise your hand in some capacity, shape, or form, or just shoot me a smiley face, because I always love a smile. If you've ever read a research article that you've been like, what are they saying? It's important for us as individuals who are publishing research to make sure that it meets the group that it's intended to meet. Yep. Baby articles. We got some people. Right. I've been there too. I have been there too. I'm currently there, still, always, forever. And I think that some of the particular things that if it's difficult for us, individuals that are within the graduate level education of this particular, subject, How difficult is that for a parent who's just looking for an answer?
Exactly. Yeah. And we were just talking about the National Standards Project, for example, a great resource for evidence-based treatments. It's 92 pages and and not so easy to find online. So um, we want to make sure that this information is consumable and accessible to parents. So I think that brings us to our future research plan. We want to make sure that future research is including experimental studies. We also want to see some studies on how parent demographics affect treatment decisions, and studies also recruiting representative participant pools, because a lot of the studies that we came across, the majority of the population for these studies were middle class Caucasian mothers. And we know that there are so many more cultures and socioeconomic statuses that were left out. So that's very important when it comes to learning more about how parents make decisions.
It's important that what our data has is representative of what the population actually is, right?
Right.
All right. So I see we have some questions from Octopian about where you can get some more of this research. So I'm going to be posting 2 of the articles that we looked at in the chat. If you guys wanted to take a look at it, no problem. Feel free. We also do have some social media for KLab if you guys are ever interested in following and keeping up with this particular journey, because we're just at the very inception of what this project is.
Exactly. Yeah, you can follow our social medias. We'll put them in the chat as well. And thank you so much for being a part of our stream. This issue is of particular relevance and important to me. Being a sister of brothers on the spectrum, so my whole family went through this journey as well. So it's just really important to us, our lab, our families, to make sure that we're getting the best possible treatment for our children.
I think we have some pretty good questions right now. So Brianna wanted to know if we've looked into conducting surveys with parents from all different backgrounds. So part of what we need to decide within our next couple of steps are whether or not we're going to be collecting qualitative or quantitative data. But one of the most important things that we want to be looking at is making sure that we are reaching out to different sources that allow us to access different populations that were neglected in these previous studies. To answer your question, yes, but I would like to look further into the research before I make a definitive answer. That would just be irresponsible at this point, and I'm wearing a denim button up, so I don't do irresponsible.
I think it's super important to recruit representative populations for our studies. So I think that would definitely be the goal for our next project.
Yes, Octopian brings a really good point. They've had parents that do not feel heard when they are talking to therapists. So I think this kind of brings us from the future research section into a little bit more of an action item. There's some articles by LeBlanc, especially, that if you guys are behavior therapists, know how we're perceived. And LeBlanc does a really excellent job diving into that. So if that's your particular question, then I can definitely send you a reading related to that. It's very fascinating. But it is important for us to be making sure that our research, but also our words, are consumable to parents, and that we're hearing what the actual issue is, right? Like, our job is to listen to function. So what is the function of the question? It's not that we need to be right. If we want to sell ourselves, we have to sell ourselves according to the variables that we found.
Right, and it's very important to be culturally responsible. We're in this together with the families, with the parents. They want the best possible treatment for their child. They want to see results. Just being on that same page with them, listening, that's super important.
It's not an intellectual debate with a parent. It's you trying to help them solve a problem. And so I think it's important that we take that approach. Well, let's save the intellectual debate for the research that we're putting out there to figure out some of these factors and variables so that we can better our practice. We have a couple of different questions, so I'm loving that these are coming through right now.
Cool.
All right, I want to make sure I get your Twitch name right. We got Wicket Link. What was something you learned while doing this that you'd give as advice to someone else doing a similar lit review? Great question. Find a research partner that is as motivated and wonderful and in love with the project, as I've been so fortunate and lucky to work with. I think that's been really, really helpful. Just in terms of like, as a human and a person, Mel's brain power just blows me away. So being able to work with her is a real honor and treat and keeps me motivated to go. So that is one particular thing, is find a Mel. But if you cannot find a Mel,
or Matthew.
One particular thing that I think is really helpful is to look at the sources, check out who has cited particular articles, look at the labs who are publishing different things, because you want to make sure that the research that you're doing is valid, right? You want to make sure that it's not just one study that's been used and then you're incorporating what they've found and saying, this is the truth, right? Replication, verification, these are really, really important things. And if that hasn't quite been proven yet, doesn't mean that the research is null, but it is important to include when you're doing the literature review that more research needs to be done to beef up those findings.
Right, future directions. Beautifully said.
We got a question from Aragon. Sure, Wicked, thank you for your question. Do you think recommendations from professionals will ever be able to compare with parent networks and internet information? Yes, and one of our articles actually did a really cool job breaking down the stages of parent to expert. I think it's actually titled From Parent to Expert.
Right, yeah. So the journey of a parent from initial diagnosis to essentially become an expert in their child's diagnosis.
Right, it's by Edwards et al. And it, in the very beginning of the diagnostics, what's reported to be the most effective is the physicians and the professional recommendations. So I think another area where future research could really improve this is the weight of these different variables and which one of these, even though this number reported, which one of these weighs more within the timeline of the individual's prognosis. According to Edwards et al., it seems that in the very beginning, physician and professional recommendations are paramount. That's where that starts. And then later, within a couple months of treatment, it transitions and shifts a little bit to other parents and internet research and social media and just support groups. Because remember, at some point, those parents become the parents that are recommenders. That's a fascinating read. I would 100% recommend reading that to see a little bit more. But we digested the research for you if you don't want to.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so definitely we can provide Edwards et al.
I believe we had another question. Oh, how can parents figure out what research is good? I mean, that's a big and important question for us to look at. I think it starts off with making sure that the research is consumable. Again, one of our future research directions is to look at the demographics of parents. Only some of the articles reported them, and we had articles where parents went all the way up to PhD level education, and we had articles where parents hadn't even finished high school, right? Which isn't to say that they're not intelligent, but their exposure to different sources for literature and research is not the same as an individual who's gone through a PhD level application. So it fully depends on the level of education that the parent was previously susceptible to. As one thing that we want to look at. The other thing too that we can be doing as behavior analysts is making our research more consumable. I don't think that we need to be using all these smart big words all the time.
Exactly.
If people who we want to be reading these are parents, it should be consumable to parents. Hot take.
That's very important, having it consumable and also having these resources accessible. So if the physicians that are diagnosing the child, for example, can provide the parent with treatments that have been established, like the National Standards Project, or resources like that, consolidated maybe in a brochure, or multiple conversations, I think that would be also super important to include. I would say a guided research project process.
What are some of your experiences trying to convince parents of treatments? Well, what's interesting is that my personal experience has been at this point in my professional career is, I'm going in and working with parents that have already accepted some level of, services because they're being provided the applied behavior analytics services, right? Now that I've transitioned to working with adults, and I find that the worst thing you can do when a parent is like, hey, I've heard about this thing that's not evidence-based. So for example, I heard taking my kid off of gluten will help with their symptoms. What do you think? I found that the worst thing that you can do personally is be like, no, it's not evidence-based. We've said before, and it was one of the points that you brought up with Octopian, which is really important. you need to make sure that you're listening to the parent. What is it truly about that particular non-evidence-based treatment that appeals to them? Is it that it's less time consuming? Is it that they've been told by someone else that it might work? And also, is it really going to be harmful for you to be including alongside your evidence-based stuff? You know, you can teach them to be data takers. That's always fun, to do their own sort of data. Yeah, I agree with Aragon. Usually not trying to convince parents out of other treatments they're not harmful and won't interfere with other services. What was something you learned while doing this that surprised you? I think one of the main things that surprised me was that physicians would say that there was nothing.
Yeah, that was super shocking.
That was really fascinating. And upsetting, and kind of like gave us an idea for what we can be doing at this moment in time, because it's really important that literature doesn't just like exist within a bubble. When we were going over figure 3, one of the things that Mel had mentioned was that physicians, when they were making their recommendations, sometimes would recommend evidence-based treatments, sometimes would recommend non-evidence-based treatments, such as diets, saying that, oh, you know, I've heard this might be able to work, this might be something. And some physicians have gone straight up with the route of saying there's nothing, there's no cure. Which there is no cure, that's true, but it doesn't mean that there's no treatment. And that, it was super surprising to both of us that we saw that. Aragon, your point I think is absolutely 100%. It could be that they were asked about a cure, but what parents were taking from that is that there was nothing that they could do for their kid. And so I think it's important that we also speak to physicians and practitioners and recommenders about the words that they're using. So I do think it's important that if parents ask us if there's a cure, we're honest with that, but you don't just leave them hopeless, you know? So we should teach physicians to better communicate with parents. That's definitely, you know, a separate area for research, I think. There's an entire sea of research that needs to be done in collaboration with the medical field. This is hopefully where you guys will come in. Consider publishing in journals that are not just ABA specific. Consider taking your journals and turning them into more consumable little videos or things like that. We're actually toying around with some of that in KLab. So if you follow us on our social media, you'll see some of that. So to answer your question, Wicket, these particular minorities, the minority of parents that reported that the physician said nothing, which we do want to emphasize, it was a minority of parents that reported it, but it was still happening. They reported that they were not directed really towards anything. To actually further filter that out in the research would definitely be something that we want to look into if that is something that we're finding. But from the current research, that's about as much as we have. I think, Vahe, you hit the nail on the head there. There's, it comes down to comprehension, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing is consumable to the person it needs to be consumable to, and that we have some level of buy-in. So definitely good conversations to have all around. I'm happy that we are having this dialogue. It's an important one.
We actually have considered that, Michael. So have we considered using this as a platform for other things besides poster presentations? Some of our lab mates were really interested in how can we make ABA more consumable in little fun short videos, live streams. So we definitely want to start using this as a platform to connect to viewers and people that can just log on and listen and talk about ABA with us. ABA is applied behavior analysis, by the way. All right, so I did link the Dropbox in the chat. You can request permission. I'll definitely grant it. And that will give you the articles we were talking about during this talk. Thank you so much for tuning in again. And thanks, Matthew, for being the awesomest partner ever.
Mel, you are the SpongeBob to my Patrick.
We have the best friends forever friendship ring. We'll be in the chat for a little bit just to see if anybody else has any questions or suggestions. But again, thanks so much. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming. My mom just texted us, great job.
Aww.
Some people were not able to join the chat, but definitely viewers, so that was great.
Yeah, we have a couple different things that are coming out, so you guys can look forward to some dissemination of virtual reality and the effectiveness of that training. What we mean by the word effective. We have some individuals working with the Jet Propulsion Lab with NASA. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of different posts coming about the research that's being done there and the particular projects that are being worked on at the moment. Mel and I are going to continue doing this particular research within parents and evidence-based practice. And we have some lovely other individuals that are looking into computer-based intervention training. We have a public health individual within our lab who's disseminating public health there, and we're talking about how to incorporate ABA within that, especially right now with COVID. So we have a whole lot of stuff going on. This is a stream that hopefully whet your palate a little bit to kind of follow us and see what kind of things we're putting out. Get some ideas hopefully for you and your research labs. Any questions that you guys might have or any suggestions are definitely welcome. We also have some podcasts that our mentors recently on. Mel, do you know the exact name of the most recent episode?
The title of the podcast was COVID-19 Episode 6, Pandemic from CRR Radio. So I'll also put that in the chat. And you can also see it on our social medias. We posted it as well on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Dr. Kazemi has also done some podcasts with Behavior Babe, but if you guys haven't listened to her podcasts, she did an episode also with the Daily Behaviorist, which has the most high definition quality camera I've ever seen. It was almost uncomfortable, but she's shown brighter than my future, so it was pretty cool.
Dr. Kazemi's latest podcast was called Pandemic Messaging Using Behavioral Science. All right, thanks, guys. We really appreciate your support. Thanks, Aragon. I made this with PowerPoint, this little funnel, this method section funnel. He was kind of into it.
All right, well, in true out-of-the-box fashion, so long, farewell to you, my friends. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, you guys.
Until we meet again. Thank you for coming.
I said goodbye, farewell, until we meet again. Take it away, Penny. Okay. Thanks, guys. Woo. All right. I'm going to end the stream. Happy Mother's Day.